a few months ago, and we weren't able to dive in even as deep as I wanted to in that Instagram live, which was amazing. So I thought, why not bring him onto the podcast where I can really quiz him on the things that I'm interested about, the things that I know, insights that will really help you, and of course, get to know each other better. So today's guest is none other than Dr. Mark Hyman. He's a practicing family physician and an internationally recognized leader, speaker, educator, and advocate in the field of functional medicine. He's the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center, the head of strategy and innovation of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, a 13-time New York Times best-selling author, and board president for clinical affairs for the Institute for Functional Medicine. Now, he's the host of one of the leading health podcasts, The Doctor's Pharmacy. Highly recommend listening to it and checking it out. Dr. Hyman is a regular medical contributor to several TV shows and networks, including CBS, This Morning, Today, Good Morning America, The View, and CNN. He's also an advisor and guest co-host on the Dr. Oz Show. This is an episode I'm so excited about where we will dive deep into how to save our health, our economy, our communities, and our planet one bite at a time with a discussion about his latest book, Food Fix. Welcome to the show, Mark Hyman.
That was so sweet. Thank you, Jay. So fun to be with you.
It's so fun to be with you. I loved our Instagram live. We were just sharing. We did that just before lockdown and the pandemic and everything kind of shifted. And I'm remembering back to doing it with you. And I loved it so much. And I'm so glad we're actually getting to spend this quality time together now and really dive into this great book you've written.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really the culmination of a life's work to connect the dots between everything we love and care about and how they're connected in ways that we don't imagine, but that we actually solve the problem of food. We solve the problems of chronic disease, of the stress on our economy, of the disintegration of our communities, of racism, of environmental destruction, climate change, national security, kids' education. I mean, all of it's connected to food. And it's really such a joy to be able to share how those things are connected and actually what we can do about it. Because it's not called food apocalypse, it's called food fix.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can't wait to dive into all areas of that with you, because I think we don't realize how powerful and influential food is, not just in our bodies, not just in our minds, but in the world. And I know that inside this book, you've gone into so many studies and so much research to really show the impact of food in the world. But I actually want to start somewhat a bit more personal with you, because I was discovering some fascinating things about you. And this was one that I loved, that I feel there's no better way to start this interview than letting our audience know that you were a yoga teacher before you were a doctor.
That is true. I mean,
that fascinated me. When I was like, wow, that's cool.
I majored in Buddhism and Asian studies and Asian religions in college. And I wasn't going to be a doctor. I was going to be a monk.
I remember.
And I actually decided, well, I'm not sure I want to be a monk. Maybe I'll just try to be a doctor and be of service in that way. And it was really driven out of the notion of compassion and service that was so embedded in Buddhism, and I learned about in college. So and I then became a yoga teacher and decided to become a doctor after that. So it was an afterthought, and I'm still working at it.
I love that. Well, when we get onto that, it means you're thinking like a monk for sure. So I love that. But tell me about how you think that, tell me a bit more about that compassion piece that you were sharing there, because I think it's really interesting that, people get involved in medicine for so many reasons. People get involved in being authors for so many reasons, but it sounds like your kind of foundation was wanting to help people, wanting to make a difference.
Yeah.
That was the
I think, when I really studied Buddhism, I was obviously looking for answers as a young man of 18, 19 years old, and what's the truth and what's the meaning of life. And in it, I realized it was a description of how to heal suffering. And the focus of Buddhism isn't a religion, it's a methodology for healing and relieving suffering and understanding the way our minds work that cause us to suffer so much. And I began to really focus on this notion of how we don't have to suffer and why we suffer. And it was really that led me to understanding that I could actually be in that space of service and working on healing through not just, being a monk, but actually being a doctor and actually helping patients and people understand how to heal chronic disease, which is what I do. And so I think, there's so much suffering in the world. There's so much burden that everybody suffers from, both psychologically, physically, in so many different ways. And I was really drawn to doing something to help deal with that. And that's really what led me to becoming a doctor.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really unique way of looking at it, because I think for so many of us, sometimes we can be dealing with physical or emotional pain or issues for such a long time before we even think that there's something we need to do about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are living with chronic issues for such a long time, and we don't really listen or hear from the body or from the mind what we need to change. So when you look at it that way, that you can change what suffering you choose and what you allow in, it's huge. Tell me one more thing. Sorry, go on. You were going to say something.
No, I'm just saying, what's your mission in life? It's really to end needless suffering. There's some suffering you can't avoid, but there is a lot of needless suffering. And the place where I feel most effective is really helping people understand that they can heal from chronic disease using a new strategy, which is functional medicine. It's really an approach of using food as medicine, but it's understanding the root causes. It's understanding the body as a system. It's really helping restore and regenerate health as opposed to treat disease. And people suffer unnecessarily. And I think this goal for my life has really been to sort of bring this way of thinking and helping people into a broader perspective. And that's really what I do at Cleveland Clinic. We're publishing research on this. It's really gratifying to see that actually that it's catching on, that people now understand what this is, that they understand that our current medical paradigm isn't really solving a lot of their problems. And, I got there because I was sick. I got very, very ill when I was young from chronic fatigue, living in China, got mercury poisoning, and ended up having just, my body just collapsed. And I had to literally reverse engineer my way to health using principles of functional medicine of how to restore my health. And I realized it was applicable to so many patients, people with autoimmune diseases and digestive disorders and mood disorders and Alzheimer's and autism and diabetes and metabolic issues. All the things that people suffer from that we don't really deal well with traditional medicine is what I really focused on. Yeah,
that's incredible. And I love how so much of the good we do always comes from some sort of pain in our own life.
Yeah.
And, it's amazing that you've been able to go and take it so far, and not just take it far, but you're really challenging the status quo. Let's start there. Actually, in Food Fix, I doubt people take the time to actually think that the food industry has an agenda of their own. But can you share some ways in which the industry is strategic in how it advances its own goals and missions? I feel like most of us don't expect it.
Oh boy, that's a can of worms. So there are a lot of unintended consequences that have led to our current food system that were born out of good intentions, right? We wanted to feed the world. We wanted to have the ability to grow lots of food for a lot of people and provide a lot of calories at scale and modernize agriculture. And that was happening in the 50s and 60s, which led to this commercialization of industrial agriculture, which led to enormous amounts of starchy industrial food being produced. Right. So we were all enamored with, astronaut food and processed food and Tang instead of orange juice. And unfortunately, that's led to a method of growing food that's produced the worst food on the planet. It's mostly ultra processed food, which is made from soy, corn, and wheat in different extruded colors, sizes, shapes, and forms. It's all deadly, about 60% of our calories. And it's also led to destruction of the environment through destruction of the soil and biodiversity of plants and animals and insects, and also stresses on our water and increasing climate change and so the pollution from the incredible amount of pesticides and herbicides. And we use 6 billion pounds around the world of glyphosate, which is pretty toxic. And we use 400 billion pounds of nitrogen fertilizer, which has all kinds of devastating consequences. So the way we're growing the food and the food that we're growing is devastating our health and devastating planetary health. And so the problem is that the food industry is the biggest industry on the planet. It's trillion with a T dollar industry that is now trying to maintain the status quo, unfortunately, which is not a good one. So it wasn't like they said, we're going to make people sick and fat and we're going to destroy the environment. They just didn't know, but now they know. And so there's a very concerted effort to control our food policy, which is, as a doctor, why would I be caring about politics and food policy? But it occurred to me as I'm sitting in my office seeing patients one-on-one that I can't cure diabetes in my office. It's cured in the kitchen, in the grocery store, on the farm. And I need to sort of look upstream and look at the root causes. And they began to say, well, what's causing the food that they're eating that's making them sick? Well, it's the food system. What causes the food system? It's our food policies. And why do we have the food policies we have? Because it's a food lobby that drives that. And so they drive a lot of the status quo. And they do it in government policy. And we spend $500 million just on the Farm Bill in 1 year. In 2005, the GMO labeling law was defeated because the food industry collectively spent $192 million on one bill in lobbying. And they do this by driving our dietary guidelines policy, our agricultural policies that promote the growth of these raw materials or commodities for ultra-processed food. They do it through controlling what we can say on food labels. They control the restrictions on marketing, so we can't actually limit marketing for junk food. And across the whole, multiple 10 agencies of the government, there's so many policies that are influencing our food system that are often at odds with each other, contradictory, but they're in the interest of the food industry. So that's happening. And then they're also co-opting science. So the National Institute of Health spends $1 billion on research for nutrition. The food industry spends $12 billion. Most of it's propaganda, like, if the Dairy Council says milk is nature's perfect food, well, all the studies show that. Or Coca-Cola finds that, when they fund a study that obesity has nothing to do with soda, so it doesn't make sense. They also fund groups that are front groups, like the American Council on Science and Health, which sounds like a great noble cause, or Crop Life, or the group for sustainable agriculture, and they're all front groups for the food industry to propagate their agenda and create misinformation. And then they co-opt public health groups, so like the American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, Academy of Nutrition Dietetics. 40% of their budget is from the food industry, so they're not giving independent advice. And then they co-opt social groups like the NAACP and Hispanic Federation and groups that are doing good in the world. They fund them. For example, I was showing a movie that I was in a number of years called Fed Up, which is about childhood obesity and the problems we have with the food industry and sugar and starch. And I went down there and I met with the head of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, which is Martin Luther King's church, met with his daughter, Bernice King, and they were very excited to get behind this and have a screening at the King Center in Atlanta. And I was excited about this. And a few days later, I got a call and said, we can't have this showing at the King Center. I'm like, why? So, well, Coca-Cola funds the food industry, funds the King Center. So it's pretty frightening when you see all these different strategies to target certain groups, to put out wrong science, to support misinformation through these front groups, through influencing public health groups, through controlling policy. And it's a really devastating effect, which has led to the fact that 6 out of 10 Americans have a chronic disease, that 75% of us are overweight, that 42% are obese, that 88% are metabolically unhealthy. I mean, just take that in for a minute. 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. That means 88% are not. And these people are at more risk for COVID-19 and other chronic diseases. So we really had this crisis moment here. And I think we need to understand how all these things are related. And then we need to design a strategy to both from a grassroots level, from a business innovation level, from philanthropy, and from clearly policy to change what's happening.
Wow. I mean, that is one news update in a great way. I was with you the whole time. When I hear that and I think about my community, my audience listening or watching or anyone consuming this right now, it's like it can feel very overwhelming to an individual, for the individual that doesn't have the feeling of just like, there's two things that come to mind. One is like, do these people realize that they're actually destroying people's lives? Because, it almost, at the end of the day, it's like you said, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's not like it started that way, but now that people are aware and we continue to fund it in that direction, it may leave people feeling quite helpless. Where is a great place for people to get started? Of course, this book, for people to get educated, because I feel like the biggest challenge in making choices when you're like, oh my God, I can't trust the labels. I can't trust the ingredients on the back. Where do people trust? Where do they find trust is really good.
Well, I spent a lot of time when I wrote the book Food Fix to dive into practical solutions, both for individuals, for businesses, policies. And I created a food fix action guide. It's free. They can go to foodfixbook.com and download it. Essentially, it gives you 20 of the top things you can do as citizens and individuals to have an impact to change your health and change society and change planetary health and drive policy and drive businesses. And it works. When we change what we want to do, and we vote with our wallet, we vote with our voice, we vote with our fork, and we vote with our vote, we see massive change. I mean, General Mills and Danone, which are two big food companies, are now funding farmers to convert their lands to regenerative agriculture. So they're literally stepping up and doing what the government isn't doing and funding farmers to transform agriculture to produce nutrient-dense food in a way that restores the soil, restores the plant nutrition, and restores human health. That's groundbreaking, and it's because we can make those choices. So I talk about how do you become a regenitarian? How do you regenerate your own health, and how do you regenerate planetary health and our social communities and their health? And it's pretty simple, right? It's eating real food. It's not buying into the industrial food that we're all eating, which is hard to do for some people, but I give real clear resources on what to look for, where to buy things that are not necessarily expensive, because people think it's expensive to do this, but it actually can be done really at scale in a way that isn't going to break the bank. You have to become a smart consumer. You have to read food labels. You have to seek out different sources of food, whether it's community supported agriculture or farmers markets or online retailers that sell direct to consumer like Thrive Market or Mariposa Ranch, which actually sell regeneratively raised beef and other animal foods that are really healthy for you. And there's things you can do if you get inspired in your own community. You can be an agent of change, right? Maybe you want to get your local government to start a compost ordinance so you'll compost your food, because food waste is a huge problem. Like 40% of our food is wasted, and it's one of the biggest drivers of climate change. It's a bigger contributor of methane than cows. And it's all your vegetables you're throwing in the compost, in the landfill. And you can actually start to understand how to do these things for yourself. You maybe have a compost pile in your group. If you want to become an activist, you can turn up the heat on your politicians and food companies by finding organizations that are doing it and supporting them, or lobbying your representatives. I mean, you can actually have an impact locally, and you can decide maybe you want to work in your school and help the school lunch and nutrition be better. And people have done that. And so in the book is just full of examples of actually how to take control of your own health and your own life and your own community. And it's working. I mean, it's why we're seeing the changes we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for creating that action guide, everyone. That's foodfixbook.com if you want to go and grab that, because I think that's what people are looking for. I really believe that people are looking for action guides because that's where they know they need to start. And one of the things that I'm fascinated by when I was looking at the book, and I've been looking at your work, you talk about how I think it's like the average child between something like 2 and 13 or 14, you say, like sees on average like 10 to 11 junk food ads per day on TV.
It's terrible. I mean, the average kid sees probably 10,000 ads a year.
Yeah.
And that's television. Now we're seeing stealth advertising. So a lot of these studies were done on food marketing to kids. There's about $17 billion spent in 2004 when it was tracked on junk food advertising to kids. And the worse the food, the more the ads and the worse the ads were. So, and now Facebook, for example, last year had, 500 billion ads for junk food on Facebook, right? It's just unbelievable how much. And there's stealth games for kids, like advert games, where they're literally embedded propaganda for food companies. So little McDonald's, go to the McDonald's store and go to, get your Burger King, whatever. It's terrifying. So we see the biggest impact actually is this changes in food marketing. And in this country, there's the First Amendment. You can't restrict people's right to free speech. And but I don't think there's any law that prohibits us from protecting our children from these kinds of messages, because they can't tell the difference between reality and an ad until they're about 8 or 9 years old. And they're targeting these kids. And in Chile, when they actually repealed the ability or removed the ability for these companies to market between 6 a.m. and I think 10 p.m., there was dramatic reduction in the use of these foods and dramatic reductions in obesity. But this country doesn't want to do that because it's such a big moneymaker for these companies.
Yeah, that's really alarming, because ultimately the people making the decisions are obviously aware that the food's not healthy for people, and it's not going to benefit their body or their mind, but they still continue to invest in, creating challenges for kids. And I always, whenever I get asked randomly to invest or be a spokesperson for different brands or whatever it may be, and whenever it's something that's aimed at young people, I'm always just like, well, would you how old I always ask them, how old your son or daughter? And they'll tell me their age. And I'll be like, would you recommend them to use this product? And the amount of times I've heard people say, no, I wouldn't. But I'm like, but you're selling this, like, I'm just so confused by that. Do you think that's the level at which we have to change it? Like, it needs to change on the level where people go, my profitability is not as important as people's children. Like, I
think that's changing. I was really excited to hear, there's this group called the Business Roundtable, which is all the top businesses in America. They get together, the CEOs. And in the last meeting, they made a stand. They said, we have to look not only at shareholder value, but stakeholder value. Meaning, what is the impact of our company on our customers, on the workers, on the environment? Who are the stakeholders in the products we're creating? And it's not just about profit and shareholder value, which I thought was a big step forward. So I think we're seeing more movements towards conscious capitalism, but there's definitely entrenched companies that just don't want to change, and they're not going to do it voluntarily. So there has to be sort of a parallel system that grows up that shows that this can happen. And I think we're doing it. And I want it to happen faster, but I think it's... I think it's happening.
Yeah, and how much of it is also, and I know you know the answer to this, but it's how much of it also is our addiction and habits because of the way those products have been created. So we also find it hard to let go of them. So I'll give you a personal example. I grew up eating 4 sugar products a day when I was young. And so, 4 chocolate products a day. Sorry, not 4 sugar, 4 chocolate products a day. And so I would eat a chocolate biscuit, a chocolate bar, a chocolate ice cream, and a chocolate yogurt nearly every single day of my life. And I was overweight as a child. I struggled with it, whether it was bullying or whether it was just feeling unhealthy. And as I grew older, I started to realize that I was addicted to sugar, especially in chocolate. And I got so used to having it. And it took me to, who I've talked to you about before, meeting my wife, who was able to find me alternatives. Because that's what I said to my wife. I was like, I need an alternative if I'm going to have to shake this habit.
Yeah.
And so I ended up finding things sweetened with monk fruit and other things, which have been amazing. But
that's good for you, monk fruit, right?
I know, how ironic. I do not own the brand or have any affiliation with it whatsoever. but the intriguing thing to me about that is that there are alternatives that exist. But I want to share this for the audience. It's like, I get what it feels like to be addicted to a food that may not be good for you. But tell us about how much we're addicted to these foods.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real problem, Jay, and I think most people don't realize it, and they internalize the feelings they have about what they eat and blame themselves. So, oh, why can't I stop eating this? Oh, I'm gaining weight and I just can't stop myself. And they think it's their fault. that they're overweight or that they're sick. And that is just a bunch of nonsense, and scientific nonsense, because when you look at the science of these foods, these ultra processed pulverized foods that are high in starch and sugar, they're really designed to hijack our brain chemistry, our hormones, and our metabolism in a very specific